let's do an example data project. We're going to read a file, get some stuff, and then sort, count, filter that stuff. This particular stuff is about Pokemon. We've got the number, name, type, and then some stats like attack and defense for each one. I think total it's about 1,000 of them, which is a good amount to work with. And I got this, by the way, from Kaggle.com, Kaggle, which has all kinds of files about weather, stock prices, products, medical data, all kinds of things you might choose for your data project. And so we're going to read this with open, and then the name, and the name ends with .csv, which is very common. You probably see that for your project as well. It stands for comma separated value, so it's like a comma between each column. And sometimes they can get complicated. For example, what if there was a sentence inside of one that had its own comma, and we have to make sure that's separate? But for this, I happen to know that it's simple enough that I can just go split. Okay, so I'm going to say next will give you one line, so I'm going to use that as an example. Dot split. Next is basically what a for loop does each time, so it gets like the next line from a file or the next number from a range, that kind of thing. So hey, this looks great. We have a list of strings after splitting up the first line, except we have this little line break at the end. This is built into any file because visually they show it broken into lines, but it's really just one big string with these magical \n characters. So let's take that off, which you can do by .strip. And hey, there we go. So I'm going to call that header because we're actually going to use that to build our dictionaries. These are going to be dictionaries for each one, which will have these headers pointing to the value. So like, name Bulbasaur or whatever. So let's say for the other lines, we're going to go dict to get a dictionary, zip to line up the two things, the header and the current line. So header and line, and then I'll do the same process I did over here. And then the hardest part is closing all the parentheses. Let's say we'll put them in a big list, and then we'll go let's print the first one to see if it worked. Should be, yeah, looks great. Number 1, name, Bulbasaur, type, grass. I do notice one problem, which is that everything is a string, including the numbers. So if we tried to do math on them, it could fail, or if we tried to compare them, it could be wrong. We'll come back to that in a minute. For now, let's call this, let's give it a function wrapped around it, and then just call that function. We'll say read. Maybe we'll give it the file name so that it could read other files if we wanted. Then we'll put this down here as another little test. See how that goes. Make sure I didn't mess it up just by rearranging things. Okay, cool. Now let's give ourselves some questions. I'm going to say, first, let's look at one of these numbers because we know we're going to have to convert them to actual numbers. Let's say, what are the top 5 Pokemon by HP? So the top 5 tankiest. And let's make a function called tankiest. Okay? We'll come back to that in a minute. And then let's say question Bulbasaur is a grass type, and I bet that's pretty common. Let's say, how many grass type Pokemon are there? Then we'll make a little function for that. And let's do one more. Let's do, when I was looking earlier, I saw Umbreon and Vaporeon, and I wondered, what are all the EV evolutions? So let's find those guys. Earlier, when I say how many grass type, that's a lot. I don't want to actually know their names because it's probably triple digits. But for this one, let's actually show them. Let's actually get a list because it's probably just 10 or something. So let's say, what are all the Eon Pokemon? Let's say Eon family Pokemon. And if I try to run this, of course, it's going to tell me error. But that's kind of a good thing because it's a reminder, hey, you got to make this function, So let's do, in order to do this HP thing, we've got to turn these strings into numbers. Otherwise, it might just pick somebody who has a 9 as the first digit, even if it's not even close to the actual highest number. So, okay, fine. I think what we're going to do is make another separate function because you have to go through and look at each chunk and say okay, some of them are going to turn into numbers and some are not. When you do that, when you take a string and convert it to something more structured, more meaningful, the name for that is parse, P-A-R-S-E. So let's do that. Let's in fact do all this stuff in there. And then we'll go, we'll do a for loop. We'll say for chunk, when we break it into chunks, if the chunk, there's a string method called isDigit. You could also do try except, We'll go int chunk. And for a lot of these, they'll follow the same pattern. We begin 0 or empty string or empty list, and then we do a for loop, and we add on to it. This is a pretty common pattern, and it's very common to call that thing result because it's generic. It doesn't say what it's going to be, but it's very meaningful to know that this is the thing that's going to be returned. So if I'm looking at some code and I see result, I go, that's going to be the thing that we build up in order to return at the end. It's not just like a piece of scratch paper that we toss at the end of the function, Of course, you can do this in other ways like a list comprehension, which isn't going to need a name if it just says return that thing, or map. If you use the map function, you won't need a name for the variable, right? But I'm trying to keep it to the stuff that we cover in class with, of course, options for other ways. So let's try this. We're going to run and get the same Bulbasaur with some of these guys being numbers. Yeah, no quotes, no quotes. And now we can do the comparison or the math. We could do some more complicated questions like which Pokemon have the highest ratio of attack to defense or something like that. But let's keep it simple for now. Let's go tankiest because that's what we called it. The tanky means that it's able to absorb a lot of damage. At least that's what I've heard in certain games. So let's go, okay. We're gonna have to sort them. I mean, I guess we don't have to. We could keep track of it ourselves. But if we sort the list, then we could just take the first 5 of the last 5. So we could say sort it, key equals something, which is, how do they judge the sorting? Is it the ones with the longest names or the ones with the, most amount of E's in their type or whatever? It could be anything. And then I want the biggest ones first, which is not the way it works. So I'm going to go reverse equal true. Now I can just go :5 to get the first 5, you know. But what is this key? We have to give it a function. And sometimes with dictionaries you can just use the .get method to get something, but that's not the case here. We could make one. We could just go like def get HP return. But that seems a bit much for this thing that we're going to use once. You could use a lambda, which is a thing Python has to make little baby functions you're just going to use once. But it's pretty ugly and we haven't covered it. And there actually is something meant for this specific situation, which is a function called item getter. And you give it a, you can give it an index for a list, or you can give it a key, anything that would go in brackets basically. And it'll produce the little function for that situation. However, you have to import it from operator, import item getter. Let's say, okay, return that to return the top 5 most HP guys. Oh, it probably did work, but it's very hard to read because we're showing everything about them. We would really just want the name, right? So, okay, fine, let's get the names. Let's go, do you want to call it result again? Can do that. For this guy, better. Now it's a list of names, but it still looks a bit weird. Let's do a line break in between them. If you remember at the beginning, we took off the line break. That was the \n. Now let's put one on, or put one between these guys. Oh, beautiful. That will look better at the end when we've got them all, but that's great for now. So how about the next one? How many grass type Pokemon are there? So I'm going to make the function, which I've already named. This is great to set it up like this, because now you just think of one thing at a time. You don't have to worry, how did I get here? Nope, I already trust that it's set up, you know? So what are we going to do? For, I'm calling it P, because usually in Python it's tradition to do the singular and plural names, like for person and people. But when it's the same word, either way, it's hard to choose. If, wait a minute, they have 2 types. So like the Bulbasaur has type 1 grass and type 2 poison, and we want the ones that have grass in either. Maybe there's a rule the grass always goes first or something, but probably not. So we can't just do equals. Right, I mean we could do equals or the other one equals. But in this case I'm going to use in. If grass is in type 1 or type 2, then it qualifies. Right, so then I'll go, hey, let's call it result again. Wait, we're not adding them, we're just doing a count. Let's call it count. And it should be 100 something. Yeah, look at that, 124. Great. You can do this in a shorter bit of code by using the sum function, S-U-M. Anytime you find yourself adding things up, you could rewrite it using sum to say like sum this for this, and that would work as well. And then finally, let's do the last one, which we called eon. So it was like Vaporeon. Was there one? Ooh, interesting. That might count even if we don't want it. So we'll have to come back and check if we're actually getting the ones we think we're getting. but let's give it a shot here. Let's say if the name, well, you know what, we're going to use the name twice, so why not? Instead of looking it up twice, let's look it up once. Dot ends with, which is a great string method because a lot of string methods do exactly what they sound like. We're going to add it to a list. And just the name, not the whole guy. Just like on the first one, we don't want to print the stats of each one. We'll just do like the name. And it's probably going to come out as a list. Yeah, we should go join again. And speaking of new lines, we should put those in between them. So let's go. Okay, great. That looks about right, okay? What are the top 5 by HP? Here you go. How many grass type? Here you go. What are all the eons? Here you go. Now, I think Charmeleon is not in the Eevee family, so maybe this is a bit too inclusive. I think, however, that all the other ones are probably related, so we could double check that. But it's a good example of basically the things you do in these kind of data projects. I think sometimes I said data and sometimes I said data. You sort, which is a built-in thing in Python. We give it a key and we tell it reverse or not. We let it do the job. You filter, which means you keep certain ones that meet criteria. And there's a function called filter, by the way, that does that. You transform, you do some action onto each one, like in this case, getting the name out. And there's a function called map that does that. And you count. You go through and, add 1 for each thing. And there's a function called sum that does that, which means that this code is longer than it has to be, but I wanted to show all the steps and use, classic stuff. So for your project, you might do something like this with, how many Grammy winners have got 2 in a row, or what baseball team has the best ratio of wins to losses, or what years have had the best Christmas weather in Louisville, Kentucky. Whatever you choose could be using the sorting, counting, filtering stuff. And yeah, sometimes the hard part is reading the file. Other times it's easy. You just have to see what you got, see how to work with it. In this case, there weren't any errors, like there weren't any empty lines or anything, but we could have had to clean those up too. So pretty nice organization. Each function is like 5 or 6 lines, so we can look at them one at a time and not have to worry about the big picture if it's too confusing. Give it a shot. Let me know if you have questions. And that's it for now.